All right, discussing a couple of more things here as I follow up some videos I made last night. I don't know when you're watching them. Maybe you're watching them all straight through, maybe not. But first issue I wanted to talk about is your full-time people versus your part-time people in the group dynamic at a survival retreat. Where a lot of the other video left off, I was discussing some of the more successful communes, hippie commune type areas, communal alternative community type stuff that I had personally visited, that I'd seen in California. The most successful ones were most successful at managing the full-time versus part-time residential situation and the roles that people full-time versus part-time would do. Now, there was another one which has been relatively successful that was in Florida, on the Gulf Coast of Florida. It was a Christian-oriented place, and I will like to contrast the two. Both organizations, both groups had a relatively clear set of rules. One was very clearly a faith-based organization. The other was we're kind of using the faith-based thing for tax purposes, but it's, a little bit of a complex issue. So the Christian organization in Florida had a situation where part-time people were invited from the community. If somebody was a part of the community, part of that church, they had the run of the grounds, they had a run of the common areas, and then full-time residents would use other things there. But financially, the ratio of support was about the same as the New Age one over in California. So in having an introduction, all of that sort of stuff, as people got in, anybody could visit. Okay, anybody could visit, but these are fully established places. Anybody could visit. Everybody who visited went through some sort of a introduction orientation of the rules of one kind or another. At that stage, part-time visitors, depending on the level of invitation they received, they were kind of expected to pay to be there. Now, they're not paying necessarily rent for everything, but in a way they kind of are. And what they had was a combination of apartments, houses, and campgrounds, and a RV park. Now, if somebody was just visiting somebody who already lived there, they didn't pay anything. And they actually, if they were the guest of a full-time resident, I don't believe they paid anything for that. All of the full-time resident people had the right to invite people in as guests to check it out, try it out. In the New Age place, they eventually adopted the same rule, that full-time residents could invite guests, but because it was also a commercial part-time aspect of it, there was a bit of a shared responsibility that if, let's say, a full-time maintenance person at the Christian place had somebody they invited as a guest, they've got some work duties there, they've got access to the chow hall, that sort of a thing. The guest is going to shadow them in that role. Okay, the guest is going to shadow them in that role depending on who invited them. And the inviter is responsible to a large degree for the behavior of the guest. If there's ever any kind of an issue, it's who invited you, we got to talk to this person about something. If those issues ever came up, it usually involved their children. They usually involved children misbehaving or something like that. And it's kind of a household thing. It's, people do that. At the New Age place, it was a very similar thing, but a little bit more formalized. A guest of a resident would register a certain way, whereas somebody who showed up and paid and wanted to take advantage of, let's say, the resort atmosphere at the place, they didn't need an invitation. They could watch their videos or something. Places called Harbin Hot Springs. They had a hot springs resort, and they also have a commune on site. It's a commune that runs that place. In Florida, The organization was Christian Retreat, and I believe they had a church runs it, but it was a family. It was a family that did it, the Durstein family, and I'm not quite sure how things went with the property ownership, but it's really the Durstein family that kind of ran things there, and they ran it reasonably well. At the Harbin Hot Springs, it's actually owned by a guy who technically is a religious leader, but hardly anyone's ever met him. And a lot of the full-time people would say about the leader, to know him is to dislike him. So they were there, everybody who was a full-time resident was really there for their own purposes, and they were not led by the personality of the guy who was on paper as the leader. And you won't see his name or his face in their literature, in their stuff. You'll actually see more mention of guest philosophical speakers, like if the Dalai Lama goes up there, it's like, it's a New Age thing, so they do all that kind of stuff. There was a lot of guest type people that are stronger personalities would go there and do their thing, and they would actually have more of a profile than the guy who actually owns it or runs the place. So that was a complex situation. But what made those people successful compared to ones that were less successful is they were able to have that ratio of about 10 to 1 of regular part-time people to actual full-time people that live there. Now, the other thing that they all dealt with was being able to integrate a full-time person who shows up for whatever reason, poverty, maybe they felt led spiritually to the place, they needed healing of some sort, they had something like that going on. Now, those people are usually had to have come in on a guest basis at some point. They visited and they said, listen, I've got an emergency, I'm living out of my car, I've got this, I've got that, I really need a place to be. And both places would have kind of a policy that they're really not going to kick somebody down the road unless they've broken rules. But how quickly, easily, or how somebody's accepted, a lot of times gets to what they're bringing to the table. But in every single event that I saw, the success of these things when they were becoming communal had to have a pretty good management for their particular belief systems, for their particular financial targeting, all of those things for guiding between the full-time and the part-time people. But the part-time people had to be given a part of the identity once they were accepted as the part-time people for that group. And so when you're forming a situation with the survival retreat, one of the things that's going to be very different in the survivalist movement or the prepper thing is that when you form your group and you say, okay, we're going to have the full-time people that live at the retreat, we're going to have the part-time people, and then we're going to have this shit hit the fan thing. And that's where I'm going to open up the next video.